They said the trial would be fair, but from the moment she stepped into the courthouse, justice had already left town. She was a woman, a black woman, and in that stark era, the scales were tipped long before the gavel struck. Her name was Alara, and the world saw her as property, an item to be bartered, not a soul with a spirit. The auction block was a brutal stage, its rough-hewn planks smelling of sawdust and despair, a scent that clung to her very skin. Each breath was a defiance, each blink a silent prayer against the inevitable. She watched the faces in the crowd, a sea of white, indifferent eyes, some curious, some cold, none truly seeing her. The auctioneer's voice, a booming testament to cruelty, echoed the thudding in her chest. One strong mare, good for labor, young, fertile. The words were a brand, searing hotter than any iron. Her humiliation was a public spectacle, yet her gaze, though downcast, held a fire that even they couldn't extinguish. She remembered her mother's hands, calloused but gentle, teaching her to braid reeds, to hum old songs that spoke of freedom. Now those memories felt like fragile birds trapped in a storm. The bids rose and fell, a grotesque dance of commerce, until one voice cut through the din, deeper, more resonant than the rest. It was a man, cloaked in shadow at the back, his face obscured by the brim of a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't like the others. No eager gleam in his eyes, no cruel smirk. He simply stood, a silent monolith, and placed a final bid. 1 horse, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion yet carrying an undeniable weight. A horse. That was her price. Ilara's world narrowed to the sound of the gavel falling, a final, crushing blow. But before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. The world blurred around Alara as the auctioneer's booming voice faded into a dull roar, swallowed by the ringing in her ears. 1 horse. That was her value, not a human life, but a beast of burden. The shame was a living thing, clawing at her throat, yet beneath it, a sliver of desperate curiosity pricked at her. The man who had bought her, Silas, emerged from the shadows, a figure of imposing stillness. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face, now visible in the harsh afternoon sun, was craggy, lined with unspoken stories, his eyes a color she couldn't quite decipher, like river stones under murky water. There was no triumph in his gaze, no ownership, just a distant, unreadable quality. He did not speak to her, did not touch her. He simply gestured with a slight tilt of his head towards a waiting buckboard. Its wheels sunk deep into the dusty earth. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of their circumstance. As she climbed into the wagon, her every muscle protesting, she stole glances at him. He moved with a practiced, almost weary efficiency, unhitching a real horse, a sturdy, unremarkable bay, and attaching it to the cart. Irony, sharp and bitter, tasted like ash in her mouth. She had been exchanged for an animal, and now she was being driven away by one. The journey began in a profound quiet, broken only by the rhythmic creak of the wagon wheels and the occasional snort of the horse. The landscape stretched endlessly around them, a vast, indifferent expanse of scrub brush and distant, purple-hued mountains. It mirrored her own internal landscape, desolate, limitless in its despair. She tried to discern his intentions, to read something in his stoic profile, but his face was a mask of granite. He drove with a focus that brooked no distraction, his hands firm on the reins, his posture rigid. Every passing mile was a testament to her new reality, a journey into the unknown, stripped of dignity, but clinging to a fragile thread of life. She wondered what kind of hell awaited her, what fresh torment this silent man would inflict. Her mind, despite its despair, remained sharp, observing, cataloging. She would learn, she would adapt, she would survive, even if it meant burying her spirit deeper than the dust on the road. Days bled into a monotonous sequence of sunrise and sunset, the vastness of the plains a constant stark reminder of her isolation. Silas remained a silent enigma. Their interactions were minimal, governed by necessity rather than conversation. He would stop the wagon at dusk, build a small, efficient fire, and share meager rations of dried meat and hardtack. He offered her water, always placing the canteen within reach, never directly handing it to her, as if to maintain a precise, impersonal distance. Ilara watched him, her fear slowly curdling into a frustrated curiosity. He wasn't overtly cruel, but his kindness, or rather his lack of brutality, was more unsettling than any whip. It defied her expectations, the grim tales she had heard, the raw realities she had witnessed. She had braced herself for pain, for degradation, for the casual cruelty of ownership. Instead, there was only this profound, almost reverent silence. His movements were precise, economical, like a man who knew the harsh demands of the land and respected them. He never raised his voice, never demanded more than a simple compliance. This lack of overt malice, however, created a new kind of tension, an open loop of anticipation. What was his game? What festering secret lay beneath his stoic facade? Her mind, always searching for patterns, for understanding, found none in him. He was a paradox wrapped in dust and silence. Each night she would curl into herself, the cold earth a stark reminder of her fragility, and wonder if this was a prelude to something worse, a prolonged psychological torture before the physical. She felt like a trapped animal, observing its captor, trying to discern the rhythm of its impending fate. The stars, usually a source of comfort, now seemed like pinpricks in a vast, indifferent canvas, reflecting her own dwindling hopes. The homestead appeared abruptly, a solitary structure against the formidable backdrop of the jagged mountains. It was not the grand plantation she had half feared, nor the squalid hovel she had sometimes imagined, but a rough-hewn cabin, sturdy and seemingly carved from the very earth around it. A small, untended garden patch lay fallow beside it, choked with weeds, a testament to neglect or perhaps a fleeting hope abandoned. A lean-to stable housed 2 horses, one being the bay Silas had driven, the other a sleek, dark mare, whose eyes seemed to hold a wild, untamed spark. As Silas unhitched the wagon, his movements as unhurried as ever, Ilara surveyed her new prison. The air was thin, biting, carrying the scent of pine and dry earth. Inside the cabin, it was Spartan. A rough table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot, a stone fireplace that promised little warmth. There were no feminine touches, no family portraits, nothing to suggest a life shared or a home truly lived in. It was a man's space, devoid of comfort, purely functional. Silas simply pointed to the cot. "You'll sleep there," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was the longest sentence he had uttered since their journey began. The implication was clear. She was to exist, not to live. Ilara settled onto the thin mattress, the straw rustling beneath her, and felt a profound weariness seep into her bones. She had been bought, yes, but this was a strange, solitary captivity. The silence of the cabin was immense, broken only by the crackle of the fire Silas had started, and the distant cry of a coyote. She noticed a faint, almost imperceptible smell of pipe tobacco, clinging to the rough-hewn beams, a singular detail in an otherwise featureless space. It was a small, human scent, yet it only deepened the sense of isolation. This place, like the man who inhabited it, was a fortress of unspoken truths. Days at the homestead settled into an odd, unsettling rhythm. Silas rose before dawn, tending to the horses, chopping wood, maintaining a solitary existence. Ilara's assigned duties were minimal, almost abstract. She was told to keep the cabin tidy, to prepare the simple meals, tasks she performed with a practiced efficiency born of a life lived under observation. But there was no overseer's whip, no shouted commands. Silas would leave the cabin for hours, sometimes days, hunting or trading in a distant settlement, leaving Ilara alone with the profound quiet of the wilderness. This unexpected freedom was both a blessing and a torment. It allowed her mind to wander, to reflect, to conjure ghosts of her past. She remembered her younger sister, spirited and bright, her laughter echoing in the small cabin they once shared. The memory brought a sharp pang of grief, a reminder of all she had lost. She touched the smooth, worn surface of the wooden table, imagining her sister's small fingers tracing patterns in the dust. The contrast between that vibrant memory and her current desolate existence was a constant ache. Yet, in Silas's absence, a tentative curiosity began to bloom. One afternoon, while sweeping the cabin floor, her broom dislodged a loose floorboard beneath the cot. Beneath it, not gold or secrets, but a child's worn wooden toy horse, intricately carved, its paint long faded, and a small frayed ribbon, deep blue, tied around its neck. It was a stark, intimate detail in a life otherwise devoid of personal artifacts. Ilara picked it up, the small weight in her palm feeling strangely significant. The toy was not new, but loved, cherished. A glimmer of something shifted within her. This wasn't a man who simply bought people. This was a man with a past, a tenderness carefully concealed, a wound perhaps too deep to ever truly heal. The discovery, though mute, spoke volumes, opening a tiny crack in the granite wall of her fear and suspicion, inviting a deeper, more unsettling question. The wooden horse became a silent companion, placed carefully on the small, rough shelf near the cot, a symbol of the unspoken. Ilara watched Silas with new eyes, searching for the man who would carve such a delicate thing, who would keep such a fragile memory. His stoicism remained, a thick shroud, yet she noticed small, almost imperceptible gestures. How he would pause sometimes, gazing out at the vast, indifferent landscape, a profound melancholy settling on his features like dust. How he would carefully mend a torn piece of canvas, his large hands surprisingly deft. How he would occasionally speak to the horses in a low, gentle murmur she couldn't quite decipher, a language of quiet respect. She found herself, against her will, seeking out these moments, trying to piece together the fragments of a man she was only just beginning to understand. One evening, after a particularly long day of his absence, he returned with a bounty of freshly caught rabbits. As she skinned them by the dying light of the fire, the task familiar yet unsettling, he sat across from her, sharpening a knife. The silence between them was different now, less oppressive, more like a shared breath. "You work quick," he murmured, his voice a low gravel, startling her with its unexpected sound. "My ma taught me," she replied, her voice soft, almost a whisper, testing the waters. He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Mine too." The two words hung in the air, a fragile bridge between them, a shared ghost. It was a moment of profound, subtle connection, a revelation not of grand secrets, but of shared human experience, a common thread of childhood and loss. The knife he sharpened glinted in the firelight, not a weapon of threat, but a tool of survival, mirroring the tools she now used to rebuild her shattered life, piece by painstaking piece. The landscape outside, once a symbol of her entrapment, now seemed to mirror the vastness of the human spirit, capable of both immense suffering and unexpected resilience. The revelation of Silas's past began not with words, but with a storm. A sudden, violent squall descended upon the cabin, trapping them inside, the wind howling like a banshee, rattling the wooden structure. The fire sputtered, plunging the small space into flickering shadows. In the ensuing chaos, a gust of wind tore open a small, crudely boarded-up window. As Silas moved to secure it, a loose shard of wood fell, revealing a hidden recess in the wall. Within it lay not gold, but a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, and a crude, hand-drawn portrait. Ilara's breath hitched. The portrait was of a young black woman, her eyes wide and full of life, a faint smile playing on her lips. And beside her, a young boy, no older than 8, clutching a wooden horse, its paint bright and vibrant, the very toy Ilara had found. The truth, when it struck, was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, creeping dawn. Silas looked at her, his usual mask of stoicism momentarily shattered, revealing a profound grief, a raw vulnerability she had never imagined. "My wife," he rasped, his voice thick with unspoken sorrow, gesturing towards the portrait. "And my son." He took a shaky breath. "She was auctioned, just like you, and he was taken from her, sold away to a sugar plantation in the South." The words, blunt and brutal, ripped through the oppressive silence, painting a picture of a past steeped in unimaginable pain, a mirrored agony. The man who had bought her for a horse hadn't done it out of cruelty, but out of a desperate, twisted act of defiance, a macabre attempt to reclaim a shred of what he had lost, to give another a chance he could not give his own. The irony was a bitter taste, yet it was also a profound comfort. He wasn't a monster. He was a survivor, haunted by the same demons that pursued her. His secret wasn't one of malevolence, but of a broken heart, a fractured soul trying to mend itself by offering a chance of refuge to another victim of an inhumane system. The wind outside howled, a symphony of past and present sorrows, as Ilara finally understood the depth of his unspoken burden. The storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest that churned within Ilara. The revelation of Silas's past, his lost wife and son, was a seismic shift, reshaping her entire perception of him. The man who had bought her for a horse was not a slave owner, but a victim, a bereaved soul who had seen his own family torn apart by the very institution that now held Ilara captive. Her initial reaction was a surge of disbelief, followed by a wave of profound, aching empathy. The hatred she had harbored, the fear that had been her constant companion, began to recede, replaced by a complex tapestry of shared pain and reluctant understanding. You bought me to save me?" she whispered, the words barely audible above the wind's shriek. Silas nodded, his gaze fixed on the flickering embers of the fire, his face a landscape of sorrow. "I couldn't save them," he said, his voice raw, "but I could try to make a difference just once." His admission hung heavy in the air, a testament to a quiet, desperate courage. The silence that followed was not empty, but filled with the weight of two shattered lives beginning to find a fragile point of connection. But their fragile haven was about to be tested. The very next morning, the distant sound of hoofbeats, heavy and numerous, shattered the quiet solitude. Silas's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Someone's coming," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion yet laced with an undeniable tension. He grabbed his rifle, his movements suddenly fluid, purposeful. "They tracked me," he muttered, more to himself than to Ilara. "They always do." A cold dread seized Ilara. The relative peace, the fragile understanding she had begun to build with Silas, threatened to shatter. This wasn't just a threat to Silas. It was a threat to her newfound, tenuous freedom. The external world, with its relentless cruelty, had found them. The air grew thick with unspoken urgency, and the silent alliance between them solidified, born of necessity and a shared history of oppression. The pounding of hooves grew louder, echoing like the drums of fate. Silas, his face set in grim determination, pushed Ilara towards the cabin's hidden root cellar, a dark, damp crawlspace beneath the floorboards. "Hide," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "Don't make a sound, no matter what." There was no time for questions, no room for hesitation. Ilara descended into the earthy darkness, the scent of damp soil and potatoes filling her nostrils, and pulled the wooden hatch shut above her, plunging herself into an oppressive blackness. From her cramped vantage point, she could hear the commotion above, gruff voices, the creak of leather, the jingle of spurs. Stereotypical figures, the hunters, the enforcers of an unjust system, had arrived. "Silas, we know you're harboring runaways. Give her up," a voice boomed, thick with authority and menace. A moment of chilling silence followed. Then Silas's voice, calm, unwavering. "There's no one here but me." The tension became a tangible thing, a suffocating blanket. Then came the sound of a struggle, harsh grunts, the thud of bodies, wood splintering, followed by a single shattering gunshot. Ilara's heart seized in her chest. She pressed her hands over her mouth to stifle a scream. Was he dead? Had their desperate hope, their fragile connection, been extinguished before it truly had a chance to bloom? The silence that followed the shot was deafening, more terrifying than any noise. Then voices again, softer, more panicked. "He's hit. Get the girl. She has to be here somewhere." Footsteps thudded above her, searching, heavy, methodical. She heard the scrape of furniture, the rhythmic thumping of hands against the floorboards, relentlessly seeking, searching for her. It was the pivotal emotional climax, the moment of truth. Would she be found? Would Silas's sacrifice be in vain? The darkness of the cellar consumed her, but in it a fierce defiance ignited. She would not let his act be meaningless. She would not be sold for a horse again. The search above her continued, frantic and desperate, for what felt like an eternity. Ilara, huddled in the darkness, could feel the vibrations of their heavy boots just inches from her hiding place. Her breath was shallow, each beat of her heart a painful drum against her ribs. She heard their frustrated exclamations, their curses, the growing realization that their prey had vanished. Then, slowly, the sounds began to recede. The cabin door creaked open, then slammed shut. The thud of retreating hooves faded into the vast, indifferent silence of the plains. They were gone. But at what cost? Ilara waited motionless for what felt like hours, listening to the agonizing silence, broken only by the drip of moisture in the cellar. Finally, with trembling hands, she pushed up the floorboard. The cabin was in disarray. Chairs overturned, supplies scattered, the table splintered. And then she saw him. Silas lay near the fireplace, a dark stain spreading across his rough shirt. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, but there was no life in them. Profound stillness enveloped him, a peace that had eluded him in life. The wooden horse, the little toy that symbolized so much, lay clutched in his hand. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down Ilara's face. He had given his life, not for a contract or an exchange, but for a belief in a dignity he had himself been denied. The irony was devastating. He had bought her freedom with his own, the ultimate sacrifice. But in his death, there was also a strange, profound hope. She was truly free now, not just from the auction block, but from the shadow of ownership. The wild, untamed mare from the stable whinnied outside, a solitary cry in the vastness. It was a call to the open road, to a future unwritten. Ilara buried Silas beneath the lone cottonwood tree near the cabin, marking his grave with a simple pile of stones. His secret, his sacrifice, would be hers to carry, a heavy but sacred burden. She took the wooden horse, now a symbol of both profound loss and unexpected liberation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery defiance, Ilara walked out into the vast open land. Her future stretched before her, uncertain, dangerous, but unequivocally her own. The woman who had been sold for a horse now rode on, unbound, her spirit a testament to the unyielding pursuit of freedom, a profound reflection of the truth that justice, though delayed, could sometimes bloom in the most unexpected and tragic of circumstances.